Hey guys, welcome to the conservative echo chamber. My name's Jonathan. I'm here with the great grandson of Shia LaBeouf. I'm trying to get him to tell me where those transformer robots are. He just isn't talking. Josh, where are they?
Seriously, if you bring up my family in this again one more time. Now, I just got done wearing the paper bag, being a soda. My great-great-great-grandmother does not have a place in this conversation.
No, father, but your grandmother...
We're talking about Shia LaBeouf, right?
Oh, but the mother was hot, too. I'm just saying, but she was kind of a little bit shallow.
Oh, a little bit?
Like, who calls up their boyfriend and is like, oh, hey, I'm going to break up with you. And he's like, okay.
Okay.
Although I don't disagree with his reaction. He's like, whatever. You're just a shallow person anyways.
This is a Transformers movie.
And in the meantime, I'm just going to get attacked by this robot pretending to be a girl who's actually got a tail that's going to, like, drill my brains out.
Oh, don't pretend that didn't happen.
Don't pretend that wasn't exciting for you, Josh.
That was college in a nutshell right there.
I don't think experimenting sexually goes that far. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't remember that happening in my college experience. I don't think that was
experimenting, dude. I think that was a form of assault. So yeah, college.
Would you please describe the assailant? Had long robotic tail to steal all my memories from me.
And
it's like an epidemic. It's an epidemic. Anyways, so I was in a conversation with a self-described socialist who will, of course, remain anonymous. And I think Josh, before I think I kind of considered her to be like kind of anarchist kind of socialist, but I think this person's going straight out socialist. Because at one point I actually suggested what you're suggesting is like what you just plan on giving up all your property in order to get rid of like the self-destruction that capitalism inherently creates. And the person was like, yeah, basically.
Just like that. Just like, yeah, okay.
I don't think, this kind of stuff, this language that gets used, makes me think that most socialists have an inherently flawed view of human behavior. Like that this boils down to a psychological level. Not that they have a psychological problem, but a misunderstanding of human psychology.
Among other things.
I play, to my great everlasting shame, Minecraft a lot. More than is healthy. And I play on a server that is like no PvP. Everyone is supposed to be nice, no stealing, all that stuff. Dude, I get more stuff stolen and my area, my room broken into more often on that server than I do on the PvP servers, on the one where everybody's against each other. Because if they steal something, I can't do anything to make them give it back except say pretty please. It's not like when I joined a faction, which is basically a clan on this, I brought a whole bunch of stuff with me. I set up a computer system, a storage system, stuff to do with what you mine and how to process it. Basically, I grew their base by 50% easily. And within 3 days, all the resources that were in the storage system were basically gone, except for the useless things. In a faction or a clan of 20 people, and it's roughly 10 to 20 people, all my stuff was just taken over and over again. Stuff that I had spent 5-6 hours mining over the course of several days, of course.
Yeah. Those kind of games, they only exist because some people are willing to do the grind so other people can come in and loot.
It basically, when you experiment with human nature, both in reality and in this case in fantasy as an example, communism doesn't work because it is against human nature. I'm one of the few individuals who might actually work out in a communist setting, despite being radically capitalist, despite the fact that I'm very libertarian, very conservative, very pro-capitalism. I might be one of the few people who would actually work in communism because I'm willing to actually put in the work on the basis that other people put in the work too. The problem is that when you have a system like that, a lot of people don't do that. And it's not like, oh, capitalism makes them do it. No. It's human self-interest.
There's a strange paradox. The only people who could effectively exist in a communist system are the very people who don't need it to prosper.
Pretty much. Like, I was able, like, basically, after about a week of this happening, I left the faction. Like, I packed up, I took all my stuff, I'm like, listen, you guys can't leave me alone, so I'm just gone. And the guy who was leader was like, yeah, you know what, no, you're right, I'm sorry, this sucks that this is happening, and I understand why you're doing this. Because I should, like, if communism works, if human behavior works naturally to promote a communistic setting, then in that scenario, I should have been able to set up a storage system and, gone back after contributing my own materials to it and being like, wow, it's really obvious that there are multiple people contributing to this storage system because there's so much stuff in it. Exact opposite happened. Because people just said, oh, free stuff, I'm going to take it because I'm operating in my self-interest. And that's honestly the point of capitalism as it regards to human behavior, is that capitalism recognizes that people tend to do what is in their own self-interest. It's a basic human principle. If you get into psychology, eventually you'll take a course called behavioral psychology, either behavioral psychology 101, whatever they name the course. What you're going to find out is that human behavior is caused by whatever behavior is rewarded, that behavior will increase. Whatever behavior is punished, that behavior will decrease. So in this game of Minecraft, on this no PvP server where you literally are unable to hurt another person to kill them and take their inventory, if they take something of yours and it's in their inventory, there's literally nothing you can do to prevent them from, to force them to give it back. Aside from getting, the creator of the game to come in and ban them, which isn't going to happen. So, on this game, basically the reward for taking someone's stuff is you get their stuff. The punishment is pretty much nothing. Whereas, if you were to take, an example of, I wouldn't call it a capitalist system, but if you go to a PvP server where you could be punished for stealing someone else's property, if you take something, you better be prepared to face the consequences. And if you're in a faction where the person who's in charge actually follows the rules, he can kick you out of the faction and then have you killed. I mean, obviously in the game, you get multiple lives, so it's not like, you actually die in real life.
Whoa, out of business by sword.
Well, because let's look at communism. All right, under which people don't have personal property. I'm not talking about land. I'm talking about computers that you don't personally own. I kind of wonder about clothing though. Like this is an offside. Do they feel the same about clothing, or will everyone get their own clothing?
It's hard to say because ideally, private property is the enemy, and so you wear clothing because you're part of the society, and so because of that, society needs to be clothed because society really doesn't want to look at you right now because it's nasty. So society will allow you to wear the clothes of us all that we may be shielded from the sight of you.
That what? I don't even know what that sounds like. That made no sense to me.
Okay. Gonna try this again.
Okay.
Ideally, if we go by the idea of Karl Marx, there is no private property. You have what you have, the clothes that you wear. It's not because you are an individual, it is because you are part of society. You are part of the collective. And society, they just have this idea in their heads, people wear clothes. And so you get to borrow the clothes of society because you are part of society. And so you don't own the clothes on your back in a purely Marx-inspired system.
You know what's interesting to me is this is kind of an offshoot, but in the same brand. Have you ever watched kids play with toys that they're supposed to share?
There is blood.
But have you ever heard this line? A kid has a toy near him, and it's one spot that he's supposed to share, He's not touching it or anything, but if you try to grab it, he'll be like, wait, no, I'm using it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not done with it yet.
Exactly. Even under like what is basically for kids, like they actually experience a form of communism / socialism, because a lot of toys they have, like no one's allowed to actually own.
That's why all the toys suck in daycares.
Yeah, well,
You're kind to your own bike, I guarantee you.
But they still try to, like, people still naturally try to enforce property rights by claiming stuff and saying like, oh, I'm still using it. It's natural for humans to try to enforce property rights because owning property is a natural thing. By that very definition, communism cannot work. Just because people are naturally going to gravitate towards a system of ownership, whether that's enforced on a legal level, on a government level, basically like property law, whether that be land or items that you either make or trade for or buy or sell, or they're going to start enforcing it personally, aka people will go and beat up someone who steals something from them, or alternatively, if they want something, they'll beat someone up and take it. That's what is going to happen. And on the same token, if you go back to behavioral psychology, if people are motivated to engage in behaviors by what rewards them for that behavior, for example, I go to the store and buy food, I am rewarded for giving my money away by the possession of food. I go to my house and I cook it and I eat it, and my reward for the behavior of cooking the food is the consumption of the food. The eating of the food creates a release of serotonin in my brain that is pleasurable and reinforces that behavior. Similarly, a lack of reward or a punishment for a behavior will decrease that behavior. So if I make something, like let's say I make this, like let's say I make a computer and it goes into the collective, well, I'm not able to access that reward. So I have a behavior that is not rewarded. That behavior will decrease.
A good way to understand the impact of communism, a way you can look at it, is the oversaturation of reward cancels out the very existence of reward. Because basically, if your communist system is set upon the idea of giving everyone what they need, systems based on need, those worked out so well in the past, giving everyone what they need, then it's no longer a reward like, yay, I did this, I get this. It is simply the nature of things.
Actually, no, it's worse than that, because under a system in which people get what they need, basically what you have is you'll get a whole bunch of, for lack of a better term, gold diggers / money grubbers, in which you'll get a system where the behavior that is rewarded is not the creation and procuration of resources and product, but rather the behavior that is rewarded is whoever, quote unquote, demonstrates the greatest need is the one who gets the most resources. Which actually you see when you hear stuff about like welfare queens and U.S. welfare. Welfare queens are people who their behavior of, quote unquote, demonstrating the greatest need is behavior that's been increased to the point where they're collecting multiple Social Security checks and multiple welfare checks. Even though they're lying, that behavior has been augmented by that reward. That's what's happened. There is no, oh, I got free welfare, now I feel motivated to go out and try to find a job. That's not how that works on a psychological level. There are a few people who feel shame at accepting charity, and that shame is a driving motivator for them to get a job. But those kind of people are very few and far between.
I think Dennis Prager sets this up very well. I'm going to reword it to keep in line with our conversation, but Dennis Prager basically makes the argument that as you approach more of a socialistic and or communistic system, then our ability to process the idea of rewards is limited. And so normally say, hey, I got food. This is great. I want to look for more of this. Rather, it is simply something to be expected and in turn demanded. And so our ability to act on that which should motivate us is diminished to the point where we can no longer act because we no longer experience the necessary motivation to act.
Right. Actually, did we talk about Thanksgiving last time we talked about capitalism versus socialism?
That's right.
Yeah, let's bring that up again. Is that under, originally when the colonies were started up, some of the original colonies were communist in nature. And the reason why they failed is the youngsters there said to themselves, well, if I'm going to get food no matter what, then why should I work? I can just let the old people work. And so for 2 years, those colonies starved, literally to the point where about half their population was wiped out, until eventually, who was it that changed the law?
William Bradford.
William Bradford established a set of property rights whereby if you grow food, that food is yours and you are responsible for your own survival. And after that, the colonies just magically, like within a year, were like on the road to prosperity. Ironically,
they were producing enough to export food to the Indian tribes, who were supposedly the ones who taught us how to farm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's not.
It's ironic that they're always pictured as collectivists, teaching the Western colonists the error of their ways. In reality, we came in as collectivists and became individualists, so that way we wouldn't starve, and the Indian tribes benefited from it.
Mm-hmm. Very true. There's so many ways I want to take this. I will grant communism one thing, is that there are certain scenarios under which it can work. Unfortunately, those scenarios require kind of two things. One, it requires a very close-knit community. Whatever community decides to be communistic or socialistic in its sharing of resources needs to be a very close community where everybody knows everybody. And two, you have to be really selective about who you let into the community, because there's some people who, whatever behavior sets they have, however they go through life, they're just not going to be a good fit. They're naturally going to try to extort the system. Those kind of people will only ever be a drag to the community, plus they will provide a model of behavior to other people in the community that is unhealthy. So first that. Second, on everyone being really knowledgeable of one another, is so that if someone starts doing something that is unhelpful to the community, that behavior can be stopped by the community. In other words, if everybody knows everybody, then if Billy decides I don't feel like working today because I'm going to get fed anyways, the people in the community will naturally shame him. I hate saying it like that because literally you're punishing a bad behavior, and we like to pretend that we're above that, but basically that's what happens on a daily basis in everywhere in humanity.
It's not something anyone really decides. It's something that happens when someone pokes you in the side with a spear. You naturally
you go, ow,
and nudge it.
Ow, don't do that.
Away. Stop that.
Yeah, but in a very close community.
Only a capitalist pig would nudge the spear away, stupid corporatist arm shoving
and
away
strike back, parry? What? Counterattack? No.
Assault knuckles! Assault knuckles!
No, Josh, I am an assault weapon. I showed my face. I hid my face once, and I was arrested for carry conceal without a license. Wait, that sounds bad. That sounds like someone's gonna say, "Man, you're so ugly that when you look at people, they die."
This is the worst Halloween party ever.
Everybody's dead. They're dead. Anyways, I think there are certain circumstances where communism could work, but it cannot work. Hear me on this. It cannot work in a system where there can't be like punishment of bad behavior on a societal level, which basically occurs once there's relative anonymity. Like in our culture today, I can sit in my house and just sit here and do nothing all day, and nobody will know. Because I don't know my neighbors, they don't know me. There's not that level of connection. So our society wouldn't support it. And two, if you were to try to do it on a countrywide level, by default, that means that you can't exclude certain people. I would be fine if someone tried to create like a small like farming community or something where they're like, we're really, we're going to be communistic, but, understand if you try to do any crap behaviors, we're going to call you on it. And two, we're going to decide whether or not you're allowed into the community in the first place based on whether or not you give more than you receive. Otherwise, if you can't have those two subsets, any community is going to fall apart that tries to be communist. On the other hand, if you compare it to a capitalistic society, and note for when I say capitalism, I mean laissez-faire capitalism, which is basically just enforcement of property rights and enforcement of contractual law, which is if you make an agreement with another person, you keep that agreement. And you are free to make whatever contracts you want with another person as long as you don't intrude on the rights of another person. Does that sound fair?
No, it's evil, greedy, imperialist propaganda.
Oh yeah, totally, because who doesn't want to keep to an agreement? I mean, that's what that is. I mean, if I actually
had a socialist explain to me that contracts are relative to the individual circumstances a person is in after they make the contract.
Okay, so then I'm going to make a contract with them, and then afterwards I'll be like, relatively, I don't feel like paying you. That circumstance has changed between before and after.
Why are you attacking me?
With my words.
That would be the response.
Hateful. Because you let me. No. I mean, obviously, people who are capitalists are not angry, hurtful, vengeful, evil people. It's not anywhere near that. It's just a recognition of if you want to motivate a person to actually produce something, then make them in charge. Like basically say like what you make is what you get. Like you own that which you create. Therefore, any behavior that they engage in which creates a product or creates resources or opens up resources for gathering is going to be rewarding to them, and sitting there being a useless flunky is going to be punishing for them. Even goes as far as the Bible. The Bible says, if he does not work, he shall not eat. That was the commandment. If you shall not work to produce something, you shall not have the fruits of your labor. And of course, allow me to distinguish that phrase. In the case of if you make a contract with someone else to do a certain amount of work for a certain amount of like whatever, like when you basically exchange something, you're exchanging your service for them exchanging whatever. That's what that is. That's just a trade. Okay? I think the term employer and employee are kind of like misused. So I don't even like to think in terms of that because it's really kind of stupid. Anyways, so if someone says, I will pay you $20 to, like, let's bring up the computer example, to fix this computer, then in this case, the fruits of my labor would be the $20. Not the computer, because the computer already belongs to the other person.
Okay, actually, when you brought up, if you do not work, you do not eat, it's funny when you actually consider the context of that verse. I don't know how many people know this, but the early Christian church actually experimented with communism in its early days. In its very earliest times, the Bible actually says that everyone shared everything that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And it eventually devolved into, Paul essentially having to tell them, if you do not work, you do not eat. What happened?
Really? I wasn't aware that verse was afterwards. I do know that Paul actually worked to support himself whenever he visited other people. He was a tent maker by trade.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because, like, he basically, even though he may have endorsed the communism, he actually was a capitalist by his actions, in that he supported himself so that, like, whatever he made in trade was his, and then he chose to do with whatever he wanted.
The communism of back then is not like the communism we know of today. You see, the communism back then is actually based on the idea of basing it on the family unit. The family unit seems to be that magical... excuse me. The family unit seems to be the only unit where communism can actually succeed for any amount of time.
And an oligarchy and monarchy, for that matter. Pretty much.
In anything larger than a single family unit, communism falls apart. Because
except in rare circumstances.
Even the Christian church, the people who were their executors were commenting, wow, it's amazing how decent these people are to each other. It's a shame that we have to put them to death because these are actually some nice folk. When the people ordered to kill you are noticing, you know what, you're a good guy, then you know something is up. But even the Christian church, eventually, we know they did abandon it because Europe was not a communist.
Well, look, I don't know if I would say I would grant that a whole lot of, like, the church is no longer communist because communism didn't work. You have to remember that, was it Constantine? The emperor of Rome eventually converted to Christianity. And after that, the persecution of the Christians ended. And you had a lot of people joining Christianity, to the point where you actually had a lot of kind of pseudo-philosophers who were joining Christianity and then pretending to be knowledgeable about it and kind of spouting off their own BS.
Kind of reminds me of Marxist, but continue.
I would not be surprised if that is the point at which communism ended. Which point
it ended a little bit before that, but that was sort of the point where it could.
Well, do you know a specific time when it ended, or are you saying that it probably ended before that?
I don't know a specific time, but I do know by that point it simply did not work that way, just because of the letters Paul was talking about, because people weren't sharing things equally when he has to specify, okay, rich people, please be kind to the poor people, and slaves, do not pretty much spit on your masters. Sorry, but if everyone is sharing everything equally, that wouldn't be the case. And so not to
nitpick, but I think you would need to show me that he was referring specifically to their communistic arrangements when he wrote those verses, which I don't think he was. I know that he did write a letter to a slave master. Paul wouldn't think
that way. You see, it's a strange thing.
Well, no, hold on, because
are very economic minded. The ancient world simply was not so. If you were a businessman, sure, perhaps you thought of your own business, but the sphere at which we think of things, it simply was not a concern of Paul. You won't find Milton Friedman in the Gospel of John.
Well, that's also because it's about religion and not economics. But no, I honestly think you would have to provide a stronger case than you have. And maybe we'll devote another podcast to that.
Okay.
I think that would be good. I think we should do some research and actually come to, instead of just kind of like throwing that out, because I can kind of see what you might be getting at, but at the same time, I'm loath to just accept your word on it, because I tend to be very strict in what I take in as far as scripture goes.
Well, good luck, because the fact of the matter is, many of the most quoted theologians tend to be a bit left-leaning, and so they wouldn't look into this in the first place.
This is true, although I know several that I do take their word, not as gold, but that I respect very highly. But I think that's, as far as when you just talk about human behavior, I think the conclusion that can be reached, because we do want to bring this around, is that communism requires a system of property that is actually antithetical to human nature as a whole, which is a problem, because when you make a system that's antithetical to human nature as a whole, you run into severe problems, which is why you have some of the original colonies of the United States almost starving to death as a result. And when you compare that to capitalism, where a country in 200 years flat became the leading superpower. Actually, it was less than 200 years, now that I think about it. No, I think right around 200 actually would be a good number, because, what was it, in World War I believe the U.S. basically came out as the superpower, somewhere between World War I and World War II. Josh, you're going to have to help me out here if you remember specifically.
I'm sorry, I was having a little trouble there. Would you mind repeating what you just said, just so I can...
I'm trying to think of when the U.S. became a superpower. I know it's something that's actually disagreed upon by several economists disagree. Economists and other historians disagree about when the U.S. became a superpower. But it was definitely sometime in the last 50 to 100 years. So we became a superpower in under 250 years from the time the settlers, first landed and started colonies in the U.S. compared to Britain, which was already had a lot of their infrastructure built up, compared to India, which had already been around for thousands of years, compared to China, which had already been around for thousands of years. In 200 years, we beat all of them. And the biggest difference between us and every other country primarily has been the existence of laws of first, a recognition of individual human rights that is protected by a constitution with a balance of powers. And second, the existence of laissez-faire capitalism all the way up until the 1920s, the late 1920s. And because of that, we went from being, a bunch of, backwards colonies. In the middle of a war, we had a war when we weren't even, fully established. We fought a revolutionary war and then, later on a civil war and still managed to outstrip Great Britain and Germany and basically every country. Germany didn't have a civil war. Great Britain did lose the Revolutionary War and that kind of stuff. And I think they simultaneously fight a war with France
and Spain, if I recall.
They kind of bit off more than they could chew. I'm gonna be honest there.
Which was up until that point, that was one of the strengths of Great Britain, because they would throw themselves into situations that they could not handle, but would still end up on top. Because let's keep in mind that up until the founding of America, the British Empire was the most free empire in the history of the world.
Except for India. They kind of were... The East India Trading Company kind of did some really nasty stuff.
No, even the East India Trading Company, compared to the other guys they had done business with, now, by today's standards, it's horrific, but keep in mind the other folks who were coming into that area. And India was actually better off under, British rule than they were before. Just to pick one off the top of my head, widow burning was put to an end under, British rule, because people said, hey, why are you interfering, with our local customs? Please, respect our religion. And the person in charge at the time said, well, I understand that is your tradition, but here in Britain we have another tradition. Now, we hang those who burn their widows.
Well, she's not my widow.
If
she's another guy's
you're going
widow,
to force
so...
us to follow your tradition, then we're going to insist that you honor our tradition. That was the end of that.
That worked. Yeah, but, I know that there are people who do nasty things under capitalism, but there are people who do bad things under everything. And
the nastiest things done in history, quote unquote, under capitalism are typically direct attacks against capitalism. For example, the East India Trading Company. You think that was capitalist? Are you kidding?
No, they were imperialists. That was imperialism straight through and through.
Yeah.
or let's talk about stuff Walmart did. Walmart was found bribing officials in Mexico. That wasn't capital. Remember, laissez-faire capitalism is laissez-faire translated roughly like let it lie, which implies let it be, which means that the government doesn't interfere with business, because what generally happens is that a business getting really large will often, while businesses are small, they basically have to compete with each other because you don't have a lot of pull any other way. Like, when you're a small business, the only way you can get people to shop with you and to buy things from you is if you have a superior product, or like the shopping experience is superior. So like whatever this person gets from you, be it product, experience, the time they spend there, whatever, is going to be superior to the competition. But then once you had really large corporations like Walmart today, like Ford, like General Motors, Big Oil, et cetera, is that they were able to hire lobbyists to get government to intervene with individual businesses. And let's just skip the IRS entirely and just talk about regulations. A lot of the regulations that are passed today are ones that are pushed by large businesses, because large businesses can get around it. They can afford the lawyers, they can afford the extra fees, whatever. A small business where the owner is struggling with like paying off small loans that he had to take just to make the business start up, he can't afford to follow those regulations. When you're using the government to snuff out competition, especially from smaller businesses, that is the exact opposite of laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire capitalism means, there's a separation between government and the economy. But in this case, you literally have the economy bribing the government to come in and destroy another part of the economy. That is not capitalism. Not in the least. That is the best description I can have for what we have today, is actually more bordering towards imperialism.
Or mercantilism.
Mercantilism.
It's the dirty marriage between state and mercantilism.
And what ugly children they have.
Hey, 11 toes, some people are into that, just not coming out of the forehead.
What the horns, man, the horns.
Whoa.
But yeah.
Don't grab an inbred by the horns.
Yeah, and see, capitalism works, but you have to adhere to the rules. And unfortunately, I think the American people have kind of done themselves a disservice by being less politically active than they could be. And actually, I think if we could literally just separate the economy and federal regulations and allow the states to make individual regulations, that we would take a huge step towards, easing the crippling of small businesses that happens today. And people would, eventually people would actually be able to afford to pay decent wages. It always was funny to me to watch fast food workers strike because they're not paid enough in the middle of a 5-year depression. It's like they forgot what the word depression, what that means.
Let the workers unite.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to close this off. Josh, anything else you got to say?
I will say this. I understand the appeal of communism. I understand the appeal of wanting to share the prosperity that you have experienced. And let me tell you, I go to a great church, and we're imperfect beings, but we have found that there are ways, to... I'm going to start this again because I want to actually get this right, dude.
Okay.
I understand the appeal of communism. I understand the appeal of wanting to share the prosperity that you have experienced here in the United States. The strange paradox is that you cannot simply, write it into law. You cannot simply will it to be so, because, ironically, the more that we try to send our prosperity elsewhere, the more prosperity is destroyed. There are ways that we can help them through various church organizations and through charity. You can actually help your fellow man. But the idea that you can help liberate someone by force is a dangerous, dangerous logical hiccup.
Mm-hmm. You can't liberate people by force. And ironically, the person I was talking to that started this whole thing actually complained that capitalism would result in a police state. Just because you have to enforce property rights. But I mean, what do you imagine that people are suddenly going to become lovey-dovey and share you just because you create a communist system?
Yeah, because that worked so well in the USSR.
Actually, they had a problem with people just not producing enough. It wasn't even people being greedy.
I don't know. It
still blows my mind that profit was actually not allowed to the point that if you sold 2 loaves of bread and used the proceeds to buy 3, that you could actually be, was it shot or was it put in jail or was it just shot?
It was jailed.
Jail.
Vladimir Jaffe, a guy who actually came over here from USSR, he tells the story that if you bought a loaf of bread for 2 rubles and you sold it for 3 rubles, you could be jailed.
Which is ridiculous. Because in both, ironically, maybe the person that you originally traded with really needed the 2 rubles. and maybe the person you sold it to actually needed the bread more than he needed the 3 rubles. So in both trades, even though you profited from it, obviously, both the people you traded with were still better off.
Usually that 3rd ruble was to cover the cost of you getting from point A to point B to the people who actually needed the bread, because bread lines were not nearly so successful as...
You know what we need to talk about next time, also, is price gouging.
Price gouging. Oh.
Price gouging.
Then we can talk about Chris Christie. He's a big enough topic,
Let's forget Chris Christie. We'll price gouging, not fat New Jersey residents. I'm sorry.
No, I'm serious, because I lived here, during the hurricane.
This is true. We'll keep that for next time though, because we gotta cut this short here.
All right,
man. But look, still, my birthday's coming up next May. Is there any way you could get Optimus Prime to show up?
I had no idea what you were talking about just now.
Sure, yeah, you don't have any idea. Whatever, great-great-great-grandson of Shia LaBeouf. All right. This has been the Conservative Echo Chamber. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. Catch you later.
Dude, I don't know if you've seen Shia LaBeouf's popularity ratings lately. If he can't get Optimus Prime to come, at the right scene, what makes you think I'm gonna manage? Besides, I'm a conservative. I've already been blacklisted by Transformers.
But the robots were still conservative, though.
Yeah, the robots were conservative because
actually
they couldn't be programmed.
They were conservative, but they did behave in a communistic. No, they're more like a team. They're more like a military team. I guess you can't really ascribe any economic status to the way they behaved.
Not to mention, the racist robots did kind of remind me of some...
I'm just saying, it would be hilarious if one of the Transformers ended up as a carny worker for a while. Come see the first machine that talks and is actually a robot. Only $5. Right next to the bearded lady. Bearded lady is so jealous because she lost like all her visitors.
Yeah, lost.
All right, we're done.